1/3 in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean during World War II, where steel titans clashed beneath tropical skies, and the fate of nations hung in the balance. One modest destroyer escort would accomplish what no other warship in naval history had achieved before or since. This is the extraordinary tale of the USS England, a vessel that in just 12 days would sink 6 enemy submarines, establishing a record so remarkable that it remains unmatched to this day. Between May 19 and May 31, 1944, this single American warship would systematically hunt down and destroy an entire line of Japanese submarines, changing the course of naval warfare and demonstrating the deadly effectiveness of new anti-UB marine technology. The story of USS England is not merely a tale of technological superiority or tactical brilliance, but a profound testament to the convergence of human courage, intelligence breakthrough, and innovation under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The story begins not with thunderous guns or dramatic sea battles, but in the quiet, methodical work of American codebreakers operating from a nondescript building in Pearl Harbor. On May 13, 1944, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, known as FUPAC, and the successor to the legendary Commander Joseph Rochefort's Station Hypo, intercepted a routine Japanese radio transmission. The message sent from the submarine I-16 to the commander of Japanese Submarine Division 7 contained what seemed like mundane operational details. An estimated time of arrival off Bougainville in the Solomon Islands scheduled for 2,200 hours on May 22. But to the trained eyes of American intelligence officers, this intercepted message represented something far more valuable: an opportunity to strike at the heart of Japan's underwater fleet. The intelligence operation that made England's success possible had its roots in years of painstaking work by American cryptanalysts. Since the early days of the war, teams of mathematicians, linguists, and puzzle solvers had labored in secrecy to break Japanese naval codes. Their work, conducted in windowless rooms filled with IBM tabulating machines and mountains of paper, had already contributed to American victories at Midway and in the Solomon Islands. But never before had decoded intelligence been used so directly and effectively in anti-UB marine warfare. The process of breaking the Japanese naval code JN-25 required not just mathematical brilliance but also deep cultural understanding and linguistic expertise. Each message had to be intercepted, recorded, analyzed for patterns and painstakingly decoded using techniques that combined mechanical computation with human intuition. The decoded intelligence was immediately transmitted through secure channels to the 3rd Fleet and from there to Commander Hamilton Haines, who commanded Escort Division 39 stationed at Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. Haines was a veteran destroyer commander who had seen action in the Atlantic before being transferred to the Pacific. His experience hunting German U-boat would prove invaluable in the coming engagement. Haines wasted no time in organizing a response. He ordered the formation of a 3-ship hunter-killer task group, selecting the best anti-UB marine vessels available for this critical mission. The group would consist of 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts. USS George under the command of Lieutenant Commander Fred W. Just Raby de 698 commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Scott and USS England de 635 led by Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton. England was temporarily detached from Escort Division 40 at Purvis Bay on Florida Island to join this urgent mission. All 3 ships departed Purvis Bay on May 18, 1944, with Commander Haines embarked aboard George as the officer in tactical command. The selection of these 3 ships was no accident. Each had been specifically equipped and trained for anti-UB marine warfare, and their crews had spent months perfecting their skills in the dangerous waters around the Solomon Islands. The ships had worked together before, developing the teamwork and communication protocols that would prove essential in the coordinated attacks to come. Their crews, though young and relatively inexperienced in combat, had been drilled relentlessly in sonar operation, attack procedures, and damage control. This preparation would soon pay dividends beyond anyone's imagination. But this submarine hunt was part of a much larger strategic picture unfolding across the Pacific. That same day, the task force departed. Additional radio intelligence revealed a disturbing development. The Japanese were establishing a scouting line of 7 submarines designated the Na line, stretching between the Admiralty Islands north of New Guinea and Truk in the Caroline Islands. This submarine picket line was positioned directly across the route that American carriers were expected to use in their next major operation. The Japanese High Command was anticipating new Allied landings but remained uncertain about the target. Would it be the Marianas, the Western Caroline Islands, or the western end of New Guinea? The strategic thinking behind the Japanese submarine deployment reflected the desperate situation facing the Imperial Navy in mid-1944. With their carrier force decimated and their island bases increasingly isolated, submarines represented one of the few remaining tools for gathering intelligence and potentially disrupting American operations. The Na line was conceived as an early warning system that would give the Japanese fleet time to respond to American moves. Each submarine was assigned a specific patrol area with orders to remain on station and report any American naval movements. The rigid nature of these assignments, so different from the flexible patrol areas used by American submarines, would prove to be a fatal flaw in the Japanese plan. The Japanese strategic planners analyzing recent American carrier strikes supporting General Douglas MacArthur's westward advance along New Guinea's northern coast concluded that western New Guinea was the most likely target. In response, the Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, Admiral Somu Toyota, issued orders for Operation Ago, intended to be the decisive naval battle that would halt the American advance and protect Japan's inner defense perimeter encompassing the Marianas, Western Caroline Islands, and western New Guinea. The execution of this plan would ultimately lead to catastrophic Japanese defeats in what history would remember as the Battle of the Philippine Sea and the Marianas Turkey Shoot, where Japan would lose 3 aircraft carriers and hundreds of irreplaceable pilots and aircraft in June 1944. The planning for Operation Ago revealed the fundamental weaknesses in Japanese naval strategy by 1944. The loss of experienced pilots at Midway, the Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz had never been fully replaced. The new pilots being rushed through abbreviated training programs lacked the skills of their predecessors. Meanwhile, American pilot training had become a massive industrial enterprise, producing thousands of highly trained aviators. The technological gap was widening, too. American fighters like the F-6F Hellcat significantly outperformed their Japanese counterparts, and American ships bristled with radar-directed anti-aircraft guns that made attacking them increasingly suicidal. To support Operation Ago, Vice Admiral Takagi Teo, commander of the Japanese 6th Fleet submarines, directed submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron to establish the Na scouting line. Takagi was a veteran submarine commander who had witnessed the steady deterioration of Japan's underwater fleet. At the war's start, Japanese submarines had been among the best in the world with highly trained crews and excellent torpedoes. But losses had been heavy, and replacement crews lacked the skill and experience of their predecessors. Moreover, Japanese submarine doctrine, which emphasized attacks on warships rather than merchant vessels, had proven strategically flawed. While American submarines were strangling Japan's supply lines, Japanese submarines were being hunted to extinction with little to show for their sacrifice. In a decision that would prove fatal, 7 Japanese submarines were assigned to specific fixed positions along this line rather than being given flexible operating areas as American submarines typically were. This rigid positioning would become a critical vulnerability. The chain of events that would doom these submarines began when Japanese forces intercepted an American aircraft's contact report on submarine RO-104. In response, the Japanese promptly radioed orders to the entire Na line to shift their positions 60 nautical miles to the southeast, transmitting specific coordinates for each submarine's new position. This seemingly routine operational message was intercepted by American radio intelligence and immediately forwarded to the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific Ocean area, where crypt analysts worked feverishly to break out the coordinates. The process was complex and required not just breaking the code but understanding the Japanese Navy's coordinate system and operational procedures. Though the process was complex and required careful analysis, the American codebreakers successfully extracted the precise positions of each submarine in the NA line. For the first time in the Pacific War, this ultra-secret intelligence would be sanitized and shared directly with anti-submarine forces, giving them an unprecedented advantage in hunting enemy submarines. The intelligence proved remarkably accurate. In each case, the Japanese submarines would be found within 50 nautical miles and often much closer to exactly where the decoded messages indicated they would be. The decision to share this intelligence with tactical units represented a significant risk. If the Japanese realized their codes were two-thirds compromised, they might change them, depriving the Allies of a crucial advantage. Elaborate precautions were taken to disguise the source of the intelligence. Cover stories were prepared, attributing the submarine discoveries to aerial reconnaissance or routine patrols. The crews of the destroyer escorts were told they were acting on aerial sighting reports, never knowing that their success was enabled by one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. The 3 destroyer escorts of the Hunter-Killer Group were all relatively new Buckley-class vessels, part of a massive wartime construction program that would eventually produce 154 of these specialized anti-submarine warships, with 148 completed and some serving with the British Royal Navy under Lend-Lease. The Buckley class represented a compromise between capability and mass production. Smaller and less expensive than fleet destroyers, they could be built quickly in commercial shipyards by workers with limited experience. Yet, they packed enough firepower and anti-submarine equipment to be deadly submarine hunters. Their diesel-electric propulsion system, while limiting their top speed, gave them exceptional range and the ability to operate for extended periods without refueling. Each ship had been named to honor a fallen hero, carrying forward the legacy of American servicemen who had made the ultimate sacrifice. This naming tradition served not just to honor the dead, but to inspire the living. The crews of these ships knew they sailed under the names of heroes, and this knowledge instilled a sense of duty and determination that went beyond normal military obligation. USS George bore the name of Seaman Second Class Eugene F. George, who had been posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for his heroic actions as an anti-aircraft gunner aboard the heavy cruiser USS San Francisco during the brutal naval Battle of Guadalcanal on November 12, 1942. The battle off Guadalcanal had been one of the most savage surface engagements of the war, fought at point-blank range in the darkness with ships firing at each other based on muzzle flashes and shadowy silhouettes when a damaged Japanese G-4M Betty bomber already aflame from San Francisco's anti-aircraft fire deliberately aimed for the cruiser's gun positions in a suicide attack. Seaman George and his fellow gunners stood their ground, continuing to fire at the approaching aircraft until the very moment of impact. The bomber crashed into San Francisco's bridge structure, killing Admiral Daniel Callahan and his staff, but George and his gun crew never wavered. George and several other San Francisco gunners who died at their posts that day were awarded the Navy Cross, and ships were named in their honor. USS Raby was named for Rear Admiral James Joseph Raby, who had earned the Navy Cross during World War I while commanding transatlantic convoy operations, including the very first convoy to cross the Atlantic under American escort. Raby had been a pioneer in anti-submarine warfare during the First World War, developing many of the tactics and procedures that were still in use. His experience had proven that convoys properly escorted could defeat the submarine menace. Tragically, Admiral Raby was killed in an automobile accident in 1934 while serving as commandant of the Charleston Naval District, but his legacy of protecting merchant shipping would live on through the vessel that bore his name. USS England carried perhaps the most poignant history of all. She was named for Ensign John C. England, a young naval officer who had been killed during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. England, just 4 days shy of his 21st birthday, had volunteered to work in USS Oklahoma's radio room that fateful morning, trading shifts with a friend so the other man could spend more time with his family when they arrived in Hawaii. England himself was eagerly awaiting the arrival of his wife and 3-week-old daughter whom he had never seen. When Japanese torpedoes struck the battleship, and she began to capsize, Ensign England initially escaped to the deck. The scene that greeted him was one of unimaginable chaos. Oklahoma was rolling over, trapping hundreds of men inside her hull. Oil-covered sailors were struggling in the water, some on fire, while Japanese aircraft strafed survivors. But remembering the men still trapped in the radio room below, England made a fateful decision. He returned to the sinking ship's interior. 3 times he descended into the capsizing battleship, each time successfully guiding a trapped sailor to safety through passages that were rapidly filling with water and oil. The ship's electrical system had failed, plunging the interior into darkness. England had to navigate by touch and memory, fighting against rushing water and the ship's increasing list. On his 4th attempt to rescue his shipmates, Ensign England disappeared into the Oklahoma's flooding compartments and was never seen again. He was one of 429 officers and men who perished aboard Oklahoma that day. The tragedy of USS Oklahoma was one of the most horrific of Pearl Harbor. As the ship capsized, hundreds of men were trapped in air pockets within her hull. For days after the attack, salvage workers could hear tapping from inside the ship as trapped sailors signaled for help. Heroic efforts were made to cut through the hull and rescue survivors, and 32 men were eventually saved. But for most, including Ensign England, there would be no rescue. Initially buried among the unknown casualties at Punchbowl National Cemetery in Hawaii, Ensign England's remains would not be identified until 2016 when advances in DNA technology finally allowed him to be returned home to Colorado Springs, where he was re-buried next to his parents. Though he received only a Purple Heart for his sacrifice, his extraordinary heroism in repeatedly risking and ultimately giving his life to save others would be commemorated through not 1 but 2 warships bearing his name, D-635 and the later guided missile cruiser CG-22. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts were purpose-built submarine hunters, armed with 3-3 guns for surface action, but optimized for anti-UB marine warfare. Their main battery, while adequate for defense against aircraft and surface craft, was deliberately kept light to save weight and cost. The real striking power of these ships lay in their anti-UB marine armament. Their arsenal included 1 triple bank of 21 torpedoes, 2 stern-mounted depth-charge racks, 8K gun depth-charge projectors that could hurl charges to either side of the ship, and most importantly, 1 Mark 10 Hedgehog anti-UB marine mortar. It was this last weapon that would prove decisive in the coming battles. The development of specialized anti-UB marine vessels like the Buckley class reflected hard-learned lessons from the Battle of the Atlantic. There, German U-boat had come perilously close to severing Britain's lifelines. The Allies had learned that defeating submarines required not just weapons, but also specialized platforms optimized for the task. These ships needed long range to escort convoys across vast ocean distances, good seakeeping abilities to operate in rough weather, and sophisticated detection equipment to find submerged submarines. The Buckley class incorporated all these requirements in a package that could be mass-produced in American shipyards. The Hedgehog represented a revolution in anti-UB marine warfare, addressing fundamental flaws that had plagued submarine hunters since World War I. Developed by the British Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development in 1941 and first deployed in 1942, the Hedgehog had only recently become widely available to American forces in late 1943. The weapon's development had been driven by desperate necessity during Britain's darkest hours when U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. The weapon consisted of 24 projectiles arranged in 6 rows of 4 mounted on a trainable platform that could fire them in an elliptical pattern 200 to 300 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds with a 35 pounds charge of TNT or Torpex explosive. The projectiles would be fired in a carefully timed sequence so that all 24 would impact the water simultaneously, creating a deadly pattern approximately 140 feet by 120 feet in area. The name Hedgehog came from the weapon's appearance when loaded. The spigot mortars protruding from the launcher resembled the spines of the small mammal. But there was nothing small about the weapon's impact on naval warfare. It represented a fundamental shift in how surface ships attacked submarines, solving problems that had bedeviled naval tacticians for decades. What made the Hedgehog revolutionary was its contact-fused warheads. Unlike traditional depth charges, which detonated at preset depths using hydrostatic fuses, regardless of whether they were near a submarine, each Hedgehog projectile would only explode on direct contact with a solid object. This fundamental difference provided several crucial advantages that would prove decisive in the battles ahead. First, the success or failure of an attack was immediately apparent. If one or more projectiles hit a submarine, there would be explosions. If all missed, there would be silence. Ship commanders no longer had to wait 20 minutes or more, scanning the surface for oil or debris to determine if their attack had succeeded. The Hedgehog could be reloaded in approximately 3 minutes, allowing for rapid follow-up attacks if the first salvo missed. This quick reload time was critical. Submarines that survived the first attack often escaped during the long reload times required for traditional depth charge attacks. Second, and perhaps most importantly, the Hedgehog solved the problem of sonar blindness that had long plagued anti-UB marine forces. Traditional depth charges created massive underwater explosions, whether they hit